Welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications, talk show produced by students for students. I'm Jalen Chance, a senior studying journalism, and our guest today is Brian Ruiz, who has over 16 years of professional digital sales, marketing, and strategy experience, having worked for the Walt Disney Company and Sony Pictures Entertainment. He now works at Google, leading a commercialization team managing programs to help their partners grow strategically with their suite of products. Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So it says in 2006, you earned your bachelor's degree in advertisement from the University of Florida. Did you always know you would go to Florida? Tell us about that story.
Yes, I didn't know that I always wanted to go to the University of Florida, but I was raised in Fort Lauderdale. So with the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, I knew I was going to go somewhere in Florida. I graduated high school, I'm dating myself, in 2002. I was looking for an opportunity to go to a university in Florida, not necessarily the University of Florida. I actually ended up applying to University of Florida early admission and got denied. So I then applied regular decision and then also got denied. And so then I appealed the decision and still got denied. So I got denied 3 times from the University of Florida. So did I always want to go to the University of Florida? I did, clearly, but it wasn't working out for me. And so I actually went to the University of Central Florida for my first year of college and then transferred to Santa Fe to do my entire sophomore year of college within 1 summer term, just to transfer into UF finally as a sophomore. A part of me always wanted to go to UF, I just didn't know it at the time.
Was advertisement always been a passion of yours? Did it kind of come up after a couple years of UCF and then at Santa Fe? How can you explain how you got into advertising?
Yeah, absolutely. Advertising was never a passion. I had no idea. I actually started college wanting to do corporate law, and then I switched over to accounting because I liked math. Because I knew as much as I loved the business side of things, I also had a creative side that I wasn't tapping into. And so then I found advertising. And I realized that advertising was the opportunity to bring the mix of creativity and business together. And so once I found that, then it really became a passion of mine.
You interned in 2005 as an advertisement coordinator for General Motors.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and your insight that you gained while there? Because obviously you made it from there all the way to Sony and Google and iHeartRadio, list goes on.
I did that while I was at UF, so I was a student here, and it was an internship program. Chevrolet came to the university asking if there was a cohort of students that wanted to help. I think at the time launched their Chevy Cobalt. I was a student that would just raise my hand for everything. I wanted any and all experience I could get, and so I just raised my hand, and we were literally given a budget, and we had to do a live event to get people to see the car, understand the car, and that was when I was able to really tap into my creative side. I helped build the ads that went into the newspaper and all of those fun aspects of advertising. But yeah, I was just that person was the only way I'm going to get the experience is by doing it. And as much as I learned in the classroom, all that stuff wasn't applicable until I actually applied it in the real world. And so I was a big fan of always taking all that experience that I was learning in the book and bring it to the real world as quickly as possible to really help me understand that book a little bit more. So I'm a big doer versus just sitting there and learning.
Right out of college, you worked for Kubota, a global tractor organization, as a brand administrator. What type of content and campaigns were you responsible for when you worked at Kubota?
Yeah, so to back up a little bit, I graduated from UF in 2006. Part of me always just wanted to leave Florida, especially being in advertising or I quickly learned that being in a bigger city might have been better for my opportunities. So I got in my car, drove to Los Angeles. And so while I was in LA getting my master's at USC, I was looking for a job. Thankfully, the master's was a night program, so I was able to work full time. Being out of college, I knew that I couldn't, I wasn't gonna work at some of the top companies, so I needed to earn my keep. And Kubota Tractor Company was hiring. They were looking for a brand administrator that was entry-level marketing. And so I quickly learned that Kubota is the equivalent of John Deere. They're just based in Japan, not the US, and they were building out their US market here. I was tasked to be internal at the client and I was working with our advertising agency, and we were helping them build billboards, TV commercials, magazine inserts, all of those fun things, making sure that anything that the advertiser agency built, we would actually have to approve. So I got to go and do things like go on commercial shoots and literally be the client sitting there saying if we didn't like something, the way something looked. I learned a lot more about farm equipment than I ever really thought I would. But I learned also very quickly that it's not what you advertise, it's how you advertise. And so it didn't really matter that I was advertising farm equipment. I was building a foundation for how to advertise and communicate with people. And that was something that really set my career up for success.
You briefly worked at iHeartRadio as an account executive. Can you explain digital media sales and how it pertains to broadcast radio and what is required kind of to obtain that success?
So I was in this production role at that mall company, and I was working with the sales teams. And I quickly realized I had a knack for working with clients, and I wanted to be a seller myself. And I wanted to move to be the frontline seller, not just the production person on the back end. And so that's why I was looking for an opportunity to get out of that mall company, Lightbox, and move into a sales role. And at the time, I was interviewing with a couple of companies, including iHeartRadio. Disney was the other one. The opportunity for this role came up at iHeartRadio, and I took it. And I was there for about a few months, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I was able to work with in this radio space, which was very new for me, but obviously a very old platform. But I was in the digital part of iHeartRadio. So you can imagine that all these different huge radio stations around the country, Ryan Seacrest, they're all affiliated with iHeartRadio. We were selling the digital footprint of that. So we weren't selling radio ads, we were selling display banners and stuff on the website. It was how can we complement digital campaigns with what they were doing on radio. And so it was very much a music-driven organization. And so I did understand that I had a knack for sales. It was a great experience because I was able to hit the ground running, working with clients and starting to make impact pretty quickly within the organization.
Say you only worked there for 6 or 7. Usually for people in that position, it takes them about a couple of years. Could you elaborate and explain why it was only such a short term?
Yeah, I was only there for a few months, 6 to 7 months. It wasn't very long. It's for a reason. I should say you should always stay in a job for a couple of years if you can, but prior to joining iHeartRadio, I was also interviewing with the Walt Disney Company. And I learned very quickly to never burn a bridge. And I got in really close with a recruiter at Disney. And I just reached out to her saying, listen, I've already gotten this great experience at iHeartRadio. I've always wanted to work at the Disney Company. I know that last role that I was interviewing for with you guys didn't work out. Is there anything available? Because I learned at iHeart, as much as I was enjoying the role, I wasn't so passionate about what we were selling. But I also grew and got the fundamentals. And so Disney said, well, actually there's a role that is available that actually you could be a perfect fit for. We just opened it up. And so I interviewed for that role. I moved into the Walt Disney Company. So I didn't leave lighthearted. I don't like to leave jobs that quickly, but the opportunity came up and I had to take it and run with it.
How was it different from the roles that you had in the past to now working for Disney?
Yeah, so Disney's a very hard company, namely because they just hold so much intellectual property, right? Between Mickey to the Muppets to all these different kind of IPs. And so working for the Disney Company was very hard, especially from a sales perspective, because Disney was packaging up things for us to bring to advertisers to sell, but so often Disney would change their mind or not want to do certain things that the advertiser wanted to do. I'll give you a great example. The Muppets were coming out with a DVD, and they wanted to have an advertiser sponsor that DVD, and so one of my clients was Procter & Gamble. Now, Procter & Gamble has Swiffer, Bounty, Charmin, all those different grocery store brands. And so Bounty Paper Towels was going to sponsor the Muppets DVD release. The Muppets were going to be on the pack for Bounty, and Bounty was going to have a coupon in the DVD. Part of that deal was to get 3 custom 30-second videos with the Muppets using the brand in some way, shape, or form. And this was like the very early stages of brand integration. We were on set, and all the puppets were there. Mind you, P&G probably spent north of $1 million just for these 3 30-second spots. The one thing P&G wanted to do was can we have the Muppets, or can we have Miss Piggy clean? And the studio, their mouths dropped. They said, Miss Piggy does not clean. They quoted said, she's the Barbra Streisand of puppets. And with spending that $1 million, you can't even afford Miss Piggy. So when you look at these 3 different spots, which are still on YouTube today, all these other characters are in there, and Miss Piggy's in a frame on the wall because they couldn't afford her. And so going from what the client wanted to what they actually got, from a sales perspective, it's really hard because you have to massage that relationship and make sure that they're happy with the end result, even though it's not how we started. So I learned also very quickly how to be agile, especially digital sales when it comes to working with studios, and being able to navigate that pretty quickly.
And clearly that agility took a lot of numerous heights as you became the account executive for Sony Picture Entertainment. This must have been, again, using your skills that you've already had in new ways. How was it working for a different company like Sony, especially transitioning from like Disney, iHeartRadio, and Kubota?
It was super interesting because at the time I was at Disney for probably about 2 years. And our head of sales was actually leaving Disney to go to Sony to start a new team. He cherry picked some people that he really wanted to bring, one being my boss. And her and I were really close. And she's like, I'm not going to Sony unless you go with me. Again, I didn't leave Disney that easily. I really loved the company, even though it was really hard, but it was a great opportunity. I was able to level up in my career. I was able to take on more responsibility. And I said, hey, I'm going from Disney to Sony. It's entertainment to entertainment. What can be so different? It was very different. Right? Sony was launching their digital products for the very first time, so they weren't as mature in the marketplace like Disney was. Half the things that we were promised that we were going to get and sell, we weren't actually given. And so it was really hard to sell things in the marketplace that you actually weren't able to sell. But it was great. So I was primarily focused on selling Crackle, which is a free streaming platform that hosts a lot of Sony old content as well as some new originals, as well as PlayStation. We started to activate different things on PlayStation. It was very different because obviously there was no PlayStation equivalent at Disney, so the gaming world alone was just a huge learning and new thing to kind of think about.
Could you elaborate more about like your positioning and how you managed to kind of immerse yourself into that with accounting?
The gaming world's massive, especially PlayStation, and first of all, it was self-education. I'm not a gamer, right? Like, I'm not a big gamer, and so it was important for me to understand what this world was, and then also what the organic opportunity was for advertising. When you think about PlayStation and Xbox and all these different consoles, you don't necessarily first think about advertising as a consumer. And so my job was to understand that, what was available to sell to our clients, and then how can I bring that packaging to our clients organically? Because I had a mix. I had some gaming clients that were endemic to gaming, like Activision and a bunch of those. So that was an easy sell, right? They had games they wanted to promote. You know, they were looking to launch like potentially new scenes or whatever it was. And so it was easy to work with them to say, let's just put banner ads up when you launch PlayStation. You can have a banner, consumers can click on it, download the game. The hard part was pivoting to say, why does AT&T need to advertise in here? Why does these other brands like PepsiCo, why do they need to think and care about gaming? And so that was definitely more of a pivot to help those brands think about not necessarily that you should be in gaming consoles, but who's the audience using those gaming consoles, and why should those audiences matter to them? And so we quickly were able to onboard a bunch of these big brands because they quickly started to realize this gaming audience was one of their biggest, champions. A lot of them are gaming for many, many hours, right? And so they're sitting there either on their phones, also texting, they're eating probably not the greatest food. And so there's an opportunity there, right, to really get in front of those consumers. Not only were we putting banner ads up all over the different, kind of entry points when you turn on the console and stuff, but we started to organically embed them into it organically. And so we had the opportunity to really just make them a part of the experience and immerse these brands into the consoles to make it feel organic to the consumer. And so huge learning experience. That it was very different than Disney in that aspect.
How important is relationship building with these account executive roles that you've partaken in?
Yeah, massively. People buy people. They don't buy things. And it's all about building trust and being authentic to who you are. And so I learned that it's important to understand who the right stakeholders are at these organizations that you're selling to, and then building really deep relationships with them. Because at the end of the day, as much as PlayStation is such a great platform, so is Xbox, and they're out there trying to sell the same kind of stuff. And so it's important to understand, obviously you're gonna try and differentiate your product, but if people like working with you, they're gonna buy from you. And if they have a good experience, it's gonna grow. The P&G example with Bounty that I gave you earlier, that was a hard one, right? But we had already worked with P&G for a year or two prior, so we had that relationship. So when things turned a little bit and wasn't going exactly as planned, that relationship and that trust was already there, where it was easier to navigate that conversation versus it being our first go with P&G. I think relationships are the foundation of sales, and then what you sell is just incremental on top of that.
In 2014, you became an account executive for another company, this time in emerging and growth accounting at Google. How were you able to get into that company, and do you have any professional tips for a lot of people who want to work in this kind of facility?
First, if you're looking for a job at Google, I would Google it. It's great, it's right there. Since I was in the entertainment world for so long doing digital sales, I was missing, there was a gap in my resume around technology, right? And so I was able to do the entertainment, the custom videos, the PlayStations, all of that, but I was missing that tech piece and working for one of those big tech companies. Again, going back to that earlier example with moving into Disney, it's all about networking and keeping those relationships, right? That relationship got me to Disney, networking got me to Sony, and then I used my relationship to Sony to get me to Google. And I had a couple of close friends within Sony who had relationships with recruiters at Google, and they put me in touch. And it was as simple as that. So as far as getting the interview, obviously I had to go through the interview process to get into Google, which was fairly robust and a good 6-month process, but navigated, got into Google, and was able to work in a role where I was now selling to clients who had never spent with Google before, and trying to onboard them to our platform. So you think about YouTube, you think about search, display banners, all of those different things that Google has to offer. That was my role when I first started there.
And you also have held several sales roles at Google over the last 9 years, maybe 10. I'm going to count it as a decade.
Yeah.
And now you're head of the Global Performance Incentives, which is not a direct salesperson, but why did you move into that role?
Yeah, so I've been at Google for over 9 years, so you're right, close to a decade. Thank you for aging me again. And so I started in that role where I was selling to clients who had never spent before. I did that for about 2 years. My next 2 years at Google, I actually moved to the UK. So I worked in our London office for 2 years as well, working with global brands in the Europe markets. So you think about Oreo, Cadbury, Smirnoff, Bailey's, Kellogg's. I worked with all those brands in Europe to help them navigate Google in that. So it was a really great experience to get the US experience and then move to Europe to get 2 years of European experience. I then moved back to New York, and I moved into our global organization, where I was tasked to work with Mars Inc. globally. So Mars Inc. is encompassing of M&M's, Skittles. Also they own Pedigree, Iams. They also own Ben's Original, Rice. So a big suite of grocery store. And so this team was tasked with supporting the top 20 to 30 global brands. And so my job was just to work on Mars solely. And so I worked with them for 4 years. And so I was able to get small business experience, global experience, and so I did all the sales organizations at Google, like all different kind of ways you can sell. And so I want to take all that experience and move into a role I was able to help all clients. And so now my role is a global role, and we build programs to help all clients of all sizes globally. So now I'm able to take all that experience and now help build programs that can help all clients grow within Google. And so it's been an amazing opportunity because I'm bringing all of this experience that I've been able to get into this role to make sure that whatever we're building for our clients, I'm always thinking about the client first. And I'm not thinking about Google first, I'm thinking about the client first. And that perspective is actually really good for this team because anything we bring to market, we want to land. And so, yeah, so now I'm more on the strategy and operations side. I will say one of the biggest changes for me was I was 100% external, which means I was working with clients all the time. I was never in the office. I was always having relationships. Now I'm 100% internal. I don't talk to any clients anymore. And so we work with our sellers internally to help them bring stuff to market. And so that was the biggest change in this role, but still very much sales centric.
What were some of your favorite parts as far as working in that position for Google?
I would say one of my biggest favorite parts was on the client side was just seeing some of this hard work come to fruition, right? One of these programs that I worked on for 3 years, a brand you might know, Sheba, which is cat food. Mars owns it. They're a big sustainability company, right? And they believe in the environment and doing what's right for the environment. And so Sheba was actually looking to build coral reefs off the coast of Indonesia. Because if you have more sustainable coral reefs, you get better fish, better quality cat food. A little bit of a stretch, but it made sense. And so we they said, come to London, let's sit in a room and talk about this, how we're doing this, because we want to see how Google can partner with us on it. And so we said, okay, this isn't something that we typically do. We typically don't think about coral, like that's just, we just put ads up, right? But we got in a room with them. And we sat down for 2.5 days. We talked about augmented reality opportunities, virtual reality, like if consumers can go down and actually see the reefs being built, from the couch of their home. So we started talking about a lot of tech. How can tech bring it to life? But then we also talked about the opportunity of Google Maps. And so the interesting thing about this coral reef restoration that they were doing is they planted it in a very strategic way that from space, if you look down at the coral reef, it spells the word hope. So they call it Sheba Hope Reef. And so obviously hope means they're trying to, it's a good message, right? And so something that I was able to do is work with our Google Maps team, get the satellite to actually circle the globe and take a picture of that. But if you go on Google Maps right now and type in Sheba Hope Reef, it'll show up on the maps and you can see the word hope there now. And so we were able to not only just like work with them on some of the tech, we obviously did advertising to bring awareness to this, we did all of those fundamentals. We're also able to put literally Sheba Hope Reef on the map. And that was a really cool thing that was a 3-year process, right? Google Maps isn't gonna easily just circle satellites. It took a lot of internal sales too to get people on board. So fast forward to last summer, June 2022, when I actually was invited to Cannes, so the Cannes Advertising Film Festival in Cannes, France. And this campaign was submitted across multiple different areas and we won 2 awards. So we won 2 Cannes Awards. And Cannes is like the top tier of advertising awards. And so I think that's when I won those awards with Mars, that's when I knew I need to pivot out of sales because I've done it, right? I got 2 Cannes Awards with my client. But that's probably one of the best examples at Google that really still feels really good.
That's beautiful. Along with the most successful and fun parts, what are some of the tough parts, in all honesty, as a Google Global executive?
Yeah. Navigating the complexities of an organization is always going to be tough, right? Like Disney, like Sony, Google is many parts, many cooks in the kitchen, many opinions. And so navigating that and building internal relationships to help you grow your client is important. I will say there was a lot of turmoil, I would say in 2017, I would say around there. You guys can all Google it. There was a time when YouTube wasn't the safest platform. There was really questionable content on there. We weren't necessarily policing it because we're an open platform. You know, we're not someone that puts out content. We let people just use this platform to upload content that they want. So we're not a publisher, we're a platform. In 2017, we started to realize there was a lot of bad actors out there that were using the platform to upload just really bad things, whether it was endangering children, whether it had terrorist-like tones, racist-type tones. It was a big brand safety issue. A lot of advertisers actually paused and they said, until you fix this platform, we're not gonna put our ads on the platform. And so it took about a 3-year process to get our clients to really re-believe in our platform again. And we've made so many changes since then. But yeah, there's plenty of low points, especially working for these big companies, because change doesn't happen very quickly. And so when YouTube went through that in 2017, it took a good year or 2 to really take away that content, put in the right policies, get the right internal teams built to help police some of this stuff, and just make it safer, right? We're still an open platform, all opinions, all content's allowed, that's never gonna go away, but now there's rules in place to make sure that like the right kind of content is being put up. And when I say right, it's not misleading, we're not promoting terrorism, we're not promoting child endangerment. So again, all opinions matter, but when it comes to those kind of sensitive topics, that's where there's a lot of policy put in place now.
And it's beautiful how you make those adjustments. It really shows how much you care and how much inclined in the knowledge that you've gained. And with that knowledge, fast forward to now, you currently teach at Rutgers Business School and UF's College of Journalism and Communications. What inspired you to want to come back and kind of teach?
Yeah, I didn't know I wanted to teach. I started to think about it a little bit more. So I've been teaching at UF for probably about 6+ years now. And I teach online. So I still live in New York, but I teach online and I'm available to my students still via video conferencing, which I think everyone's comfortable with now post-pandemic. UF actually came to me and they said, we're building this program, this online master's program. Would you be interested in teaching something around Google? And so now I teach performance advertising. And so I started building that program and teaching, and I really loved it. Because I love that it was letting me give back to UF. I was able to inspire and use my journey to help students that were starting their journey. And selfishly, it keeps me on my toes, right? The digital industry is changing all the time. And so by teaching, it gives me the opportunity to stay in the know of what's happening across the entire industry. I could easily sit in my Google bubble and just think about Google all the time, but now that I'm teaching these different advertising programs that aren't just exclusive to Google products, it's forced me to understand what Meta's doing, TikTok, Twitter, Snap, all these different platforms. And so selfishly, it's keeping me just educated. And so now I teach 3 different courses at UF, and then I also teach an advertising promotions course at Rutgers. And so I love it. I love working with the students. I think it's great to bring my experience back. And I do think the students value that I also still work in the industry. And so I'm bringing that real world perspective.
And you did tap onto it with these emerging like social media applications like TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. What are some of the new interesting trends in the digital market space, and what should we all be watching out for within the next couple days, years, months?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I talked about the brand safety thing in 2017. If you Google it, it wasn't just YouTube that went through it, Facebook, all these different platforms. Privacy was a big one. We want to make sure consumers are protected across all the platforms that they're on, their email, their credit cards, all of that. So we went from brand safety to privacy, and now we're in this new world where it's all about AI and machine learning, right? And we've heard about the ChatGPTs, Google now released Bard. There's a lot of these different AI type platforms, and so AI is like just the term that's being used nonstop. And so I think it's being on the lookout for how this whole artificial intelligence thing is going to evolve, right? As much good as AI can do, there's also a lot of bad, which is why a lot of these bigger companies are moving a little bit slower to make sure that it's done right. But that also excites me, right? This whole AI thing is really interesting. There's a lot of things that AI can really help us do so we can focus on more strategic, deep thinking versus having to do some of those kind of hygiene type things that we may not have time for. And it's also not growing us, right? We just have to do it. It's a time suck. And so AI can really help us progress and do more. So yeah, I think all things artificial intelligence.
Now with AI, the immersion of AI, and a lot of people still wanting to maintain these positions, obviously it's going to become a competitive environment when people want to use AI instead of actually using people in these situations. What skills should we consider for potential people who want to work in this business? What skills should we consider to learn to stay competitive? And do you have any advice for future people who want to work in this position? Because I'm pretty sure you inspired a lot of people to work.
No, definitely. I think when it comes to all things digital, including AI, obviously getting a solid education is important, right? And super foundational to starting a career. But there's so many resources out there to be complementing how you're learning in school. And I always encourage students and even professionals who are in the market to continue to stay curious and always learn. And so while you're in school, there's no reason why you shouldn't log on to Google Skillshop and get a certification in search. Get a certification, I think we just released one in AI. Meta has trainings, Twitter has trainings, TikTok, all these platforms have free trainings and free certifications. Push yourself outside of your education to start complementing it with how the industry is also giving you guys opportunities to get certifications. And so even today, I still actively get certifications across all these different platforms because it's important to stay curious and constantly learn. As we talked about, digital is changing and it's going to continue to change. And how it looks today is going to look wildly different 2 years ago. We talked about Disney where I was doing 3 little video spots. Integrations are super organic now. Everyone's doing them. But 10 years ago, it wasn't. So the landscape's changing very quickly. And so the more you stay curious and you continue to educate yourself, even after college, I think that's where you're going to be successful and really grow in your career.
Thank you for your insight, Brian. And thank you, our viewers, for joining us. Until next time, good night.